The snow had been falling since noon, but by the time the last train of the night pulled away from the small station on the edge of town, it had turned into a full storm. The wind pushed through the gaps in the old wooden platform, rattling the tin roof above it, and the single lamppost at the far end flickered like it might give up at any moment. Daniel Cole walked slowly along the platform, his boots crunching through fresh snow, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his jacket. He had just finished a double shift at the auto shop where he worked, fixing engines until his fingers ached from the cold metal, and his back throbbed from bending over cars for 16 hours straight. All he wanted was to get home, eat something warm, and sleep. He almost didn't see her. She was sitting on the bench near the ticket booth, slumped to one side, her head resting against the wooden armrest. At first, Daniel thought she was just another tired traveler, waiting for a train that had already left. But something about the way she wasn't moving, the way the snow was gathering on her shoulders without her brushing it off, made him stop. He walked closer and saw that she was wearing hospital scrubs, soaked through from the storm, with only a thin cardigan over them. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her lips had a faint blue tint. Her chest rose and fell slowly, but her breathing was shallow. "Hey," Daniel said, kneeling beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" She stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering, but she didn't wake. Daniel didn't waste another second. He pulled off his own coat, wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, and pulled out his phone to call for help. His hands were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the fear that he might be too late. While he waited for the ambulance, he rubbed her hands between his own, trying to bring some warmth back into her fingers, and kept talking to her, hoping the sound of a voice might pull her back to consciousness. "Stay with me," he said quietly. "Help is coming, just stay with me." It felt like the longest 15 minutes of his life before the ambulance lights finally cut through the snow. The paramedics moved quickly, checking her vitals, wrapping her in blankets, and lifting her onto a stretcher. One of them turned to Daniel. "Are you with her? Family?" Daniel hesitated. "No. I just found her here." The paramedic nodded, clearly used to strangers stepping in when no one else was around. "You probably saved her life. Another hour out here and it could have been much worse." Daniel followed the ambulance to the hospital in his truck, driving carefully through the icy roads, not entirely sure why he felt so compelled to go. He didn't know her name. He didn't know anything about her. But something about the moment on that platform had settled deep in his chest, and he couldn't simply walk away and forget about it. At the hospital, he sat in the waiting room for hours, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine, watching the clock crawl past midnight and into the early morning. Finally, a nurse came out and told him the woman was stable. She had been suffering from severe hypothermia and exhaustion, but she would recover. "Are you a relative?" the nurse asked. "No," Daniel admitted again. "Just someone who found her." The nurse studied him for a moment, then smiled softly. "Well, you're welcome to wait if you'd like. She should wake up soon." Daniel stayed. When Emily Hart finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was a stranger sitting in the chair beside her hospital bed, his jacket still slightly damp, his eyes tired but kind. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're in the hospital," Daniel said gently. "You collapsed at the train station last night. I found you and called an ambulance." Emily blinked, trying to piece together the fog of memories. She remembered finishing a brutal 16-hour shift at the hospital across town, remembered missing her bus, remembered sitting down on the platform bench just to rest her eyes for a moment while she waited for the next train. After that, everything went dark. "You stayed here all night?" she asked, surprised. Daniel shrugged, suddenly feeling a little embarrassed. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." Emily managed a weak smile. "Thank you. I mean it. You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said simply. "I wanted to." That single sentence stayed with Emily long after Daniel left the hospital that morning. In her years of working as a nurse, she had cared for hundreds of patients, poured herself into strangers who needed her, and rarely had the chance to be on the receiving end of that same kind of care. She wasn't used to someone choosing to stay by her side without being asked, without any obligation, simply because they wanted to. A week later, once she was fully recovered, Emily returned to the small auto shop where a mutual friend mentioned Daniel worked, hoping to properly thank him. She found him bent over the hood of an old sedan, grease on his hands, and a smudge of oil on his cheek. "I brought coffee," she said, holding up 2 cups. "As a thank you, since the vending machine stuff you had that night was probably terrible." Daniel laughed, wiping his hands on a rag. "It really was." They sat outside the shop on a pair of old plastic chairs, drinking coffee in the cold winter air, and talked for nearly an hour. Emily told him about her work at the hospital, the long shifts, the patients she couldn't stop thinking about even after she went home. Daniel told her about growing up in the town, about his father, a veteran who had taught him from a young age never to walk past someone who needed help, no matter how tired or busy he was. "My dad used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching," Daniel said, staring off toward the road. "It's what they do when no one is." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Daniel said quietly. "He passed a few years back. But I still hear his voice sometimes, especially on nights like that one." That conversation was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. What started as a simple thank you turned into more coffee meetings, then dinners, then long phone calls that stretched late into the night. Emily found herself looking forward to seeing Daniel after her shifts, no matter how exhausted she was. Daniel found himself rearranging his schedule just to catch a few extra minutes with her. Winter turned into spring, and their bond only grew stronger. Emily learned that Daniel, despite his quiet nature, had a deep well of patience and warmth beneath the surface. Daniel learned that Emily, despite spending her days caring for everyone else, rarely let herself be cared for in return. Slowly, carefully, they began to fill in the gaps that life had left in each other. But just as things were falling into place, an unexpected letter arrived for Emily. A hospital 3 states away, one known for its excellent trauma care program, was offering her a position she had been working toward for years. It was the kind of opportunity nurses dreamed about, one that could shape the rest of her career. She should have been thrilled. Instead, she sat with the letter in her hands for a long time, staring at it without really seeing it. That evening, she brought it up with Daniel over dinner at her small apartment. "It's an incredible opportunity," she said carefully, watching his face for a reaction. "But it's far away." Daniel was quiet for a moment, turning his fork over in his hands. "You should take it," he finally said. Emily blinked, surprised by how quickly he said it. "Just like that? You've worked so hard for this, Emily. I'm not going to be the reason you don't take the chance of a lifetime." "But what about us?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Daniel looked down at the table, his jaw tightening slightly. "I don't want to hold you back. You deserve this." The conversation ended there, unresolved, both of them retreating into their own thoughts. Over the following days, Emily found herself caught between 2 futures. One was the career she had dreamed of since nursing school, a chance to grow, to help more people, to finally reach the goals she had set for herself years ago. The other was a quiet, steady kind of happiness she had never expected to find, built on late-night talks and simple moments, with a man who had once wrapped his own coat around her shivering shoulders without a second thought. She spoke to friends, to coworkers, even to her mother over the phone, trying to make sense of the decision. Everyone told her something different. "Take the job," they said. "Don't give up on love," they said. In the end, she knew it was a decision only she could make. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled silently with his own fears. He told himself that letting her go was the right thing to do, the unselfish thing. But every night, as he closed up the shop and walked home through streets that reminded him of her, he felt the weight of what he might be losing. 2 days before Emily's flight was scheduled to leave, Daniel found himself unable to sleep. Something kept pulling at him, an old memory refusing to stay quiet. He thought about his father again, about the lessons he had tried to pass down. He thought about the platform, within snow, the fear he had felt kneeling beside a stranger who might not make it through the night. He realized that letting Emily go without telling her the truth wasn't strength. It was fear wearing a different face. The night before her flight, Emily made one last trip to the train station, the same one where they had first met months ago. She wasn't sure why she went. Maybe she wanted to say goodbye to the place that had quietly changed the direction of her life. Maybe she needed a quiet moment alone to gather her thoughts before the next chapter began. The snow was falling again, lighter this time, dusting the platform in a soft white layer. She sat down on the same bench where Daniel had found her, pulling her coat tighter around herself, watching her breath form small clouds in the cold air. She didn't hear him approach until his voice broke the silence. "I used to think helping people meant stepping in when they needed you, then stepping back once they were okay," Daniel said, standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, snow gathering on his shoulders, just like it once had on hers. "I thought that was the whole lesson my father taught me." Emily turned, startled. "Daniel." "But I think I got it wrong," he continued, walking closer. "I don't think it was ever about stepping back. I think it was about staying, even when it's hard, even when it means changing your own plans." Emily's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. "What are you saying?" "I'm not asking you to stay," Daniel said softly. "I know how much this job means to you, and I would never ask you to give that up. But I am asking you to let me come with you. I can find work anywhere. I can start over. What I can't do is imagine my life without you in it." For a long moment, Emily said nothing, simply staring at him through the falling snow, the same platform, the same cold air, but everything between them completely different now. "You'd really leave everything behind," she whispered. "You already showed me what it means to stay when someone matters," Daniel said. "I'm just trying to return the favor." Emily stood up from the bench, closing the distance between them, and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest, as the tears finally fell. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, come with me." 3 weeks later, Daniel packed up his small apartment, said goodbye to the auto shop where he had worked for years, and moved with Emily to her new city. It wasn't easy at first. He had to search for work in an unfamiliar place, and Emily had to adjust to the demands of her new position at the hospital. But every night, no matter how hard the day had been, they came home to each other, and that made the challenges feel smaller. Within a year, Daniel had saved enough to open a small auto shop of his own, just a short walk from the hospital where Emily worked. It became a common sight for her coworkers to see him waiting outside after her long shifts, coffee in hand, ready to walk her home. Over time, the story of how they met traveled through the hospital, whispered between nurses during quiet hours, shared with new employees during their first week on the job. The mechanic who found a freezing nurse at a train station, who stayed by her side without being asked, who later gave up his entire life to follow her into a new one. It became something of a local legend, a story people told each other on hard days, proof that kindness rarely goes unnoticed, and sometimes changes the course of an entire life. Years later, Daniel and Emily would still visit that same train station from time to time, especially in December, when the first snow of the season began to fall. They never spoke about it much, but they both understood what that platform meant. It was where two exhausted strangers, one freezing and unconscious, one tired but paying attention, had somehow found their way to each other. Someone eventually placed a small plaque on the bench where they first met, a quiet tribute paid for by hospital staff, who had heard the story so many times it became part of the town's own folklore. It read simply, "For the ones who wait for each other." And every winter, when the snow falls over that platform once again, the story is told a little more, passed down like something precious, a reminder that sometimes the coldest night can lead to the warmest life.